Hello and welcome back. I know it's been a while. Some stories need time to breathe, some scars need courage to be shown, and today's story, it's all of that and more. You know me from the stories we tell on our channel, tales of rising from the ashes, of faith against impossible odds. But no one knows that the greatest story, the one that started it all, began not with faith, but with vengeance. A quest for revenge that threw me into the heart of a destined storm. And in that storm, I failed. I lost her. This isn't just a story. This is a confession. And I promise you, its ending is nothing you could ever imagine. It will make you question everything you think you know about sacrifice, betrayal, and the nature of forgiveness itself. So before we dive deep into the shadows of the past, let's do something. Tell me where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. Drop it in the comments below. I want to feel our connection across every time zone, from every corner of this planet, as we witness a story that is about to change everything. The city was Alexandria, 1st century. There was no place on earth so vibrant and so rotten. Under the searing Egyptian sun, the salt of the sea mixed with the heady perfume of the spice markets, and with it, the faint metallic scent of power and fear. My name was Kalen, and I was a dock worker. My hands were hard from hauling rope, and my heart was hard from life. My existence should have been an endless cycle of sunrises and sunsets over the harbor, if not for him. Lysander. Lysander was not a king or a general. He was a philosopher with eyes that held the cosmos. He taught us of the Lumina, the inner light. He said that inside every human soul, be it a beggar or a nobleman, there was a divine spark, that without the need for grand temples or bloody rituals, we could find it, nurture it, and express it through compassion, through a song, a sculpture, or a simple act of kindness. That philosophy, so simple and yet so powerful, ignited a fire in our weary souls. We, the forgotten people of Alexandria, found our dignity in the Lumina. But the brighter the light, the darker the shadows it casts. The Roman order, built on the worship of the emperor and vengeful gods, could not tolerate a philosophy that placed power inside the individual. They saw the Lumina not as an awakening, but as a sickness, a seed of rebellion. And so they extinguished the brightest flame. They executed Lysander. The day he died, the very sky over Alexandria seemed to lose its color. The Lumina movement, bound together by our love for him, shattered. We, his disciples, became frightened ghosts again, hiding in dark alleys, whispering his name like a desperate prayer. I had lost my teacher, my compass, but the Roman Empire was about to take much more from me. Cassian, the name is still a shard of ice in my chest. He was a young, ambitious Roman Tribune, a man born of ambition and weaned on cruelty. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and utterly devoid of human warmth. He was tasked with sweeping away the remnants of the Lumina, and he did so with terrifying efficiency. I remember the night as if it were etched in fire, the thunder of soldiers' boots on the cobblestones, the splintering crash as the door to our humble home was kicked in. Cassian stood there, framed in the doorway, his red cloak a slash of power, the torchlight carving his handsome face into something demonic. He said nothing. He simply gestured, and his legionaries poured in. I fought, I swear by the gods. I fought like a cornered animal, but I had calloused hands, and they had steel and discipline. And then I saw her, Lyra, my little sister, the muse of our neighborhood, who could turn a piece of driftwood into art, whose laughter was like chimes. Cassian's men dragged her out, her long, dark hair sweeping the filthy floor. She didn't scream. She just looked at me, her eyes wide with a silent, questioning terror. I stood there helpless, the blood from a gash on my forehead mixing with my tears. Cassian looked back at me, the faintest hint of a smirk on his lips. It wasn't a smile of victory. It was one of utter contempt. He saw me, saw all of us as insects. In that moment, the Lumina died in me. The light was gone. All that remained was a suffocating darkness of pure hatred. Lysander had taught us compassion, but my heart now screamed only one word: vengeance. I didn't want to extinguish Cassian's flame. I wanted to burn his entire world to the ground. That oath, forged in pain and humiliation, became my only reason to live. My journey was no longer a search for the light. It had become a hunt in the dark, and I had no idea that the prey I was hunting was the key to a destiny I could never have foreseen. The ashes of the Lumina were still warm, but from them something else was rising. Not hope, the fury of a brother who had lost everything. The days that followed were a gray fog of mere existence. We, the few disciples who remained, huddled in damp cellars, the only places where the echo of Roman boots seemed to fade. We mourned Lysander, but his teachings of the light now felt distant, like a fairy tale told to naive children. Fear was the air we breathed, the bitter taste in the water we drank. I, Kalen, had become a specter. My hatred for Cassian was the only fire that kept me from collapsing, but it was also consuming me from within. Every night I closed my eyes, I saw Lyra being dragged away, her gaze haunting me, searing my soul. I grew distant, harsh. My brothers, who once looked to me with respect, now regarded me with a mixture of pity and fear. One night, as the rain washed the grimy streets of Alexandria, we gathered around a single sputtering candle. It was the anniversary of Lysander's death. A heavy silence filled the room. No one dared to speak, as if a single word could bring the walls crashing down upon us. And then the miracle happened. It didn't arrive with a thunderclap or a flash of lightning. It began as a whisper, a warmth that spread from the center of the chest. An old carpenter named Alara, whose hands trembled with age, picked up a piece of firewood. In the candlelight, his hands stilled. They began to move with an impossible grace and speed. Wood shavings flew like tiny stars, and in minutes the lifeless log was transformed into a small, exquisite sculpture of a phoenix, so real we could almost hear it sing. At the same moment, a young fisherman named Marcus, a quiet man who usually only spoke to his nets, began to hum. It was a melody he had never heard before. It seemed to be born from his very soul, a mournful song of loss that somehow held an unbreakable thread of hope. His voice filled the cellar, reaching into every dark corner of our spirits, washing away the fear and despair. And then it came for me, the fire. A surge of hot energy shot up my spine. Words, images, ideas I never knew I possessed flooded my mind. I, Kalen, the man of muscle and brute force, suddenly felt a different kind of power, the power of words. I shot to my feet. Every eye turned to me. I looked at their faces, saw their astonishment, their confusion, and a newly dawning spark of hope. I opened my mouth, and the voice that came out was not that of a gruff dock worker. It was resonant, powerful, and utterly compelling. "They took our Lysander," I roared, but it was a roar filled with both pain and conviction. They thought by snuffing out one candle, they could command the darkness. They were wrong. Lysander wasn't the fire, he was just the first to show us the fire was already inside each of us. Look what Alara has made. Listen to what Marcus is singing. This is the Lumina. This is the inner light that no empire can extinguish. I went on, speaking not from my head, but from my heart. I spoke of Lysander's philosophy, not as a dry lecture, but as a blazing call to arms. I turned our collective grief into a weapon, our fear into a shield. And then I spoke of Lyra. The empire did not just take our teacher, it took my sister. Cassian, that self-proclaimed agent of order, brought his darkness to my very door. He took Lyra. My voice broke, but I found its strength again. I swear, by the light that now burns in all of us, that we will not only spread the Lumina into every dark corner of this city, we will take back what is ours. I will find Lyra. Our struggle is not just for an idea, it is for the people we love. The cellar was silent, and then one person clapped, then another. Soon the room was thunderous with applause and fervent cries. It wasn't blind excitement, it was a rebirth. From the ashes of fear, a new phoenix had risen, stronger, more determined, and driven by a dual purpose: to spread a beautiful ideal and to fulfill a personal vow. That night, the Lumina was not just rekindled. It had found a new heart, a new voice, and a new sword. And that sword was me. From that night forward, Alexandria began to change. We no longer hid in cellars. We took the Lumina to the streets, but not with swords or revolutionary slogans. We fought with our own weapons, beauty and compassion. Elara and the other carpenters began to transform the city's most wretched slums into open-air art galleries. They carved sculptures of hope and human dignity onto crumbling walls. Children, instead of playing in filth, would gather to stare in wonder at these creations. Marcus and the other newfound singers would wander the marketplaces, their songs of the Lumina weaving through the chaos. Their melodies had a strange power, calming the hardened hearts of merchants, soothing arguments, and bringing a momentary sense of peace to the frantic pace of life. And I became the storyteller. I would stand in the public squares not to preach, but to tell the stories of Lysander, of his kindness, of his simple philosophy that every person had worth. And I wove Lyra's story into it. The tale of a gifted young woman stolen by power became a metaphor for Alexandria itself, a vibrant city shackled by the chains of Rome. Our power was not in overthrowing, but in permeating. We didn't attack Rome's fortresses, we laid siege to the hearts of its people. One afternoon, we staged a grand performance in the Forgotten Quarter, a slum where disease and hopelessness reigned. We brought food, music, and art. For the first time in years, smiles appeared on hollowed faces. We didn't just give them bread, we gave them back their humanity. News of the miracle in the Forgotten Quarter spread like wildfire. Hundreds, then thousands of people began to seek out the Lumina. They didn't see a dangerous cult, they saw hope. But the wider our ripples spread, the more they crashed against the seawall of the empire. In his opulent office overlooking the bustling harbor, Tribune Cassian received the reports. He didn't see art or compassion. He saw a loss of control. To Cassian, order was everything. A world where everyone obeyed the law, worshipped the gods of Rome, and bowed to the emperor. The Lumina, with its philosophy of the inner light, shattered that order. It taught people to look inward for strength, not outward. To him, this was not a philosophical movement. It was an ideological plague, a virus that could spread and rot the very foundations of the empire. He couldn't stamp it out with swords. Because we bore no arms, he had to use something else. Cassian began a new kind of hunt, more sophisticated and more cruel. He didn't make mass arrests. He planted spies in the crowds, taking names of our supporters. He put pressure on landlords, forcing them to evict followers of the Lumina. He spread rumors, twisting our teachings, painting us not as artists, but as sorcerers, as dangerous agitators. The shadow of Cassian began to stalk our every move. For every candle we lit, he brought a gust of wind. The confrontation was no longer just light against dark. It was a chess game between the power of inspiration and the cold discipline of oppression. And I knew, sooner or later, this game would require a decisive move, a bloody sacrifice. I just didn't know that the piece about to be taken wasn't one of mine, but a teacher, a friend, and the last living link to Lyra. The silent war between the Lumina and the Roman Empire was about to draw blood. Cassian understood that arresting common followers would only fuel public resentment. He needed a symbolic target, someone whose demise would strike fear into the very heart of the movement. He chose Zeno. Zeno was an old poet, a dear friend of Lysander, and the very man who had taught Lyra her first brushstrokes. His wisdom was as deep as the sea, his heart as warm as the sun. He was the soul of the Lumina, the living embodiment of our beliefs. They took him one morning as he sat by the sea, writing. They did not shackle him. They did not beat him. They invited him to Cassian's villa. It was a terrifying courtesy. I and the others frantically planned a rescue, but a secret message was smuggled out from Zeno. "Do not," it read. "An old tree must fall to give the saplings room to grow. This is my final poem." In Cassian's luxurious study, an unequal battle of wills took place. Cassian didn't torture Zeno with the whip. He tortured him with temptation. He placed a sheet of the finest papyrus and a feathered quill before him. "Write, Zeno," Cassian said, his voice smooth as velvet. "Write a poem to the greatness of the emperor, to the order that Rome provides. I will give you gold, fame, and your freedom." Zeno looked at Cassian, his ancient eyes holding no fear, only a profound pity. He shook his head. "I cannot write of a false beauty, Tribune. My poetry can only come from the inner light." Cassian smiled, a cold, thin smile. "Then write of your light for the last time." The next day, all of Alexandria was commanded to gather in the main forum. Zeno was brought to a high platform. Cassian stood beside him, resplendent in his polished armor. He gestured, and a deathly hush fell over the crowd. Zeno, in a voice frail with age but clear as a bell, began to recite his final poem. It was not a poem of defiance or hate. It was a poem of beauty, of the light in a drop of dew, of the strength in a seedling pushing through stone, of the unquenchable dignity in the heart of every person. As he spoke the last line, "They can take my breath, but they cannot take my song," a serene peace seemed to radiate from him. Cassian raised his hand, and a single arrow from a Praetorian guard flew true, burying itself in Zeno's chest. He fell. There were no screams, only the horrified silence of thousands. I stood in the crowd, my heart feeling as though it had been physically crushed. I had seen death, I had seen brutality, but I had never seen a murder so artfully and coldly orchestrated. Cassian hadn't just killed a man, he had killed a symbol. He had made poetry a crime, beauty a capital offense. The hatred in me, which had been simmering, now erupted into an inferno. I no longer saw Cassian as a tribune. I saw him as a demon, and I swore to myself I would drag that demon down with my own two hands. I no longer cared about spreading the Lumina peacefully. I wanted war, a real war. Meanwhile, Cassian, having sown his terror in Alexandria, received word of a large Lumina chapter flourishing in Damascus. He decided to go there personally to uproot the weed. For him, it was a journey of power, another act to cement his reputation. He had no idea it was a journey that would change everything. It was a journey where the hunter was about to become the prey of a power he could not comprehend. The road to Damascus was a scar across the desert, hot and unforgiving. Cassian and his legionaries moved with the confidence of conquerors. In his mind, he was already picturing the Lumina followers in Damascus trembling at his feet. He was order, he was Roman might, and he was unstoppable. But the desert holds its own secrets. As the column passed by an ancient, abandoned temple, a ruin from a forgotten age, Cassian felt a strange pull. He called a halt and entered the structure alone. He wasn't looking for treasure or knowledge. It was the idle curiosity of a conqueror, a desire to map every corner of his domain. Inside, the air was unnaturally cool. Sunlight streamed through cracks in the roof, creating hazy pillars of light in the dusty space. And there, on the main wall, was a massive fresco, faded by time but still radiating power. It was a portrait of Lysander. But this was not the Lysander from Cassian's intelligence reports. This was no rebel leader. The unknown artist had captured something deeper. The Lysander in the painting had eyes that seemed to see into your very soul, not with judgment, but with an infinite understanding. His hands held no weapon, but were open, as if to embrace the world. And around him were not disciples, but images of the cosmos, stars, rivers, people of all races. Cassian stood frozen, mesmerized. He was accustomed to the art of power, stoic statues of emperors, reliefs of bloody battles. This art was different. It held a quiet, devastating strength. And then it began. There was no sound, but Cassian's mind was flooded with music, a symphony of the universe. He saw the connection between a grain of sand and a distant star. He felt the pain of a slave at the edge of the empire and the joy of a newborn child. The entire philosophy of the Lumina, which he had dismissed as nonsensical ramblings, was no longer a theory. It was a self-evident truth, a living experience. He saw the light Lysander spoke of, not as an abstract concept, but as a brilliant reality flowing through all things, including himself. And when he saw himself through the eyes of the Lumina, he saw a terrifying emptiness. He saw his ambition, his cruelty, his profound loneliness. He saw a man who had built his castle on a foundation of fear and now stood alone within its walls. The light from the frescoes seemed to become too much to bear. It was blinding, searing away every layer of the persona he had constructed. Cassian cried out, a raw sound of a soul shattering. He threw his hands over his eyes, stumbled backward, and collapsed onto the cold stone floor. When his soldiers rushed in, they found their tribune on the ground, his eyes wide open but seeing nothing. He was blind, not by darkness, but by a light too brilliant to behold. The event at the ancient temple shattered Cassian's world. The man who saw himself as the master of order was now lost in a personal darkness, a maelstrom of inner turmoil. His soldiers, confused and unnerved, brought him to Damascus not as a conqueror, but as a broken man, a virtual prisoner of his own affliction. Word of the Roman Tribune's mysterious blindness reached the Lumina community in Damascus. But instead of celebrating, they felt a stirring of compassion, just as Lysander had taught. An elderly disciple, a healer, sought out the quarters where Cassian was being held, not to gloat, to heal. When the healer placed his hands on Cassian's eyes, he did more than mend the physical. He seemed to channel a peace that Cassian had never known. And when Cassian slowly opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was not the sun, but the kind, forgiving face of a Lumina follower. His sight had returned, but he now saw the world through an entirely new lens. The first thing Cassian did upon his recovery was not to return to his legion. He did the unthinkable. He sought out the hidden sanctuary of the Lumina community, and that is where he found me. I had traveled to Damascus with a small group to rally our brothers and sisters after Zeno's death. When I heard Cassian wanted to see us, I assumed it was a trap. I concealed a dagger in my tunic, ready for a final confrontation. He stood in a simple room, stripped of his red cloak and his legionary escort. He was just a man in plain clothes, but I still saw my enemy, the murderer of Zeno, the man who had taken Lyra. Kalin, he said, his voice devoid of its former arrogance, filled only with a deep weariness. I have come to join you. The rage I had suppressed for so long exploded. Join us, I roared. You, a murderer, a hound of Rome, dare to speak of joining us? I drew the dagger and lunged. My brothers tried to hold me back, but I threw them off. I pressed the blade to Cassian's throat, feeling the pulse of the life I so desperately wanted to end. But Cassian did not resist. He closed his eyes, an acceptance of fate on his face. Do it, he whispered. It is what I deserve. But before you do, hear this. He opened his eyes, and I saw something in them I had never seen before. Pain. I know what I have done, he said, his voice raw. I have seen it. I have seen everything. The light, it showed me the truth. And the truth is, I was wrong. I hesitated. The confession, so simple and so stark, caught me off guard. He continued, his voice almost a plea. And I know where Lyra is. I know why I was ordered to take her. My breath caught in my throat. She is not in a dungeon in Alexandria. She was never meant to be. The moment she was taken, she was put on a ship bound for Rome. Rome? Why Rome? Why? I growled, the dagger still pressed against his skin. Because someone in Rome wanted her, Cassian said. And this is where he planted the first seed of a terrible doubt in my mind. Someone powerful, someone who wants to study the gift of the Lumina, to control it, or to destroy it from within. An alliance. The thought was repulsive, to work with my nemesis, but he was the only one who knew where Lyra was. He was my only key. I slowly lowered the dagger. The room was silent, save for our heavy breathing. "I don't trust you," I said, "but I will go with you to Rome. And if this is a trap, Cassian, I swear by the light, I will end you if it's the last thing I do." An unholy alliance built on a foundation of mistrust and a fragile shared goal was forged. Two mortal enemies, one seeking redemption, the other seeking his sister, set off on a journey into the very heart of the beast. We had no idea that what awaited us in Rome was not a simple trap. It was a horrifying truth, a twist of fate that would bring everything we thought we knew crashing down. The sea voyage to Rome was a long, tense silence. Cassian and I shared a ship, but we existed in different worlds. Every time I looked at him, I saw Zeno, I saw Lyra, and my fists would clench. He, in turn, spent most of his time staring out at the endless ocean, his face a mask of contemplation, as if trying to piece together the fragments of his shattered soul. We were not friends. We were opposite poles of a magnet, forced to point in the same direction by an invisible, desperate force. When our ship finally docked at Ostia, the port of Rome, the sheer, overwhelming scale of the empire hit us. Marble temples scraped the sky, colossal statues of emperors loomed over the streets, and disciplined legions marched with a chilling perfection. Alexandria was vibrant but wild. Rome was order, cold and absolute. We had no time to take it in. Almost as soon as we set foot on the docks, we were surrounded. Not by common guards, by the Praetorian Guard, the elite, who answered only to the highest echelons of power. They did not arrest me. They escorted Cassian, and I, as his companion, was swept along. We weren't taken to a dungeon. We were brought to the very center of power, the Senate House. Inside, the air was cold and solemn. Dozens of senators in their stark white togas sat on marble benches, their faces as impassive as statues. And on the highest seat, the one belonging to the head of the Senate, a powerful man with silver-streaked hair and eyes like chips of ice, stared down at Cassian. Cassian knelt. "Father," he said, and my entire world stopped turning. "Father?" The man, the High Senator Valerius Magnus, one of the most powerful men in Rome, was Cassian's father. Valerius rose, his voice echoing in the chamber, devoid of any paternal warmth. "Cassian, my son, you were given a simple task, to crush a budding cult in Alexandria. Instead, what did you do? You allowed it to spread. Worse, you allowed yourself to be infected by its ideological sickness. You have failed me." Cassian looked up, defiance in his eyes. "Father, it is not a sickness. It is the truth. I have seen—" "Silence," Valerius thundered, and for the first time, I saw a crack in his calm facade. "I orchestrated everything for your ascent, for you to follow in my footsteps. I created an enemy for you to vanquish, and you betrayed me." My mind reeled. Orchestrated. This was all a political game. Zeno's death, our suffering, all just moves on a board to advance one family's ambition. And then Valerius delivered the final devastating blow, a blow designed to destroy not just me, but Cassian as well. "Did you think I did not know your weakness, Cassian? I knew you might fail. That is why I required a contingency, a way to study the enemy from within." He clapped his hands, and from behind a silk curtain, she emerged. Lyra. But this was not my Lyra. She wore no simple artist's tunic. She was adorned in a fine silk gown, her hair styled in the intricate fashion of a Roman noblewoman. Her face was as beautiful as ever, but her eyes were cold and distant. She walked to Valerius's side and looked down at me, not with the recognition of a sister, but with the disdain of a stranger looking upon a criminal. "Lyra," I whispered, my heart shattering into a million pieces. Valerius smiled, the smile of absolute victory. "Lyra was not tortured, Kaelin. She was educated. I have adopted her as my own daughter. I have shown her the truth about the Lumina, its dangers, the treason of her own brother. She is now a loyal citizen of Rome and my most valuable asset in destroying your movement from the inside out. I looked at Lyra, searching for a flicker of the girl I knew. There was nothing, a cold, empty void. They had brainwashed her. They hadn't just stolen her body, they had stolen her soul. I turned to look at Cassian. He was on his knees, trembling, not from fear, but from a truth more horrific than any he had faced. He realized he wasn't just a tool in his father's game. He was also a pawn, a victim. His entire life, his career, was built on a lie. In that moment, in the center of the known world, two enemies reached the absolute bottom of despair together. We had been betrayed not by our enemies, but by those we called family. All hope seemed to die, and the cold laughter of Senator Valerius Magnus echoed through the chamber, a death knell to our innocence. The Mamertine prison, the name itself was a curse. It was a damp, dark pit beneath the city where Rome threw its greatest enemies, a place where hope came to die. Cassian and I were thrown into the same cell, two broken men locked away in the dark. For the first few days, we didn't speak. I sat in one corner, consumed by the loss of Lyra. This grief was worse than death. It was a hollow, aching void, a wound that would never heal. Cassian sat in the opposite corner, still as a statue, lost in the brutal reality of who his father truly was. My hatred for him had evaporated, replaced by a terrifying emptiness. We were no longer enemies, nor were we allies. We were just two lost souls in hell. And on the third night, the silence was finally broken. "I am sorry," Cassian whispered, his voice a raw rasp. "For everything." I didn't answer. What good were apologies now? He continued, speaking more to himself than to me. My whole life I tried to make him proud. I followed every order, suppressed every feeling, became the perfect Roman machine. I thought it was strength, but now I see I was just a puppet. He looked up, and in the dim light from the cell door, I saw him weep for the first time. Not tears of weakness, but of a soul completely broken. He took everything from me, Kaelin, my loyalty, my honor, and now my conscience. In that moment, the wall of ice between us melted. I no longer saw Tribune Cassian. I saw a son betrayed by his own father. I saw a pain that mirrored my own. "He took everything from me too," I said, my own voice cracking. "My sister, she looked at me like I was a monster." We, two men from opposite ends of the world, had finally found common ground, the abyss of shared despair. And from that deep, dark place, something new began to grow. Lysander once said, Cassian spoke, his voice still trembling, that the brightest light is often found in the darkest of places. He got to his feet and felt his way to the cold stone wall. Using a sharp piece of rock, he began to carve. Not curses or cries of despair. He began to carve the verses of Zeno, the very poet he had condemned to death. I watched him, and then I too rose. I went to the wall beside him, and I began to carve the teachings of Lysander that I could remember. For the next several days, the wall of the Mamertine cell became our canvas. We spoke little, we simply carved, creating in unison. The verses, the symbols of the Lumina, images of hope. It wasn't an act of defiance, it was an act of healing. In the darkness of the prison, we were finding the light together. I, Kaelin, and he, Cassian, had finally found forgiveness, not in words, but in the shared act of creation. A week later, Valerius allowed Lyra to visit us. It was part of his psychological torture to show her how broken we were. Lyra entered, her face a cold mask, flanked by two guards. She looked at us with those stranger's eyes, but then her gaze fell upon the wall. She saw the verses of Zeno, the teacher she had adored. She saw the symbols of the Lumina, the faith she had been taught to despise. And more than that, she saw me and Cassian, her brother and his enemy, standing side by side in quiet harmony. She stood there, stunned. The carefully constructed walls in her mind, built by Valerius, began to show cracks. She tried to maintain her composure, but I saw it. A single tear, just one. It traced a path down her cheek before she hastily wiped it away. She said nothing, turned and left. But we knew. The seed of doubt, the seed of truth, had been planted. And in the hell of the Mamertine prison, a fragile but brilliant spark of hope had just been lit. The day of judgment arrived. The arena of the Colosseum was not just for gladiators, it was for public executions, Rome's grand theater of power and deterrence. Cassian and I were led out into the center of the vast arena. Tens of thousands of eyes bore down on us, a sea of faces hungry for blood and drama. High in the imperial box, Senator Valerius sat enthroned, regal and severe, with Lyra at his side, her face pale and as expressionless as a marble mask. The sentence was read, the words echoing across the sand. Treason, spreading dangerous ideologies, conspiring against the order of Rome, the punishment, death. As the executioner raised his broad axe, I closed my eyes. I did not think of death. I thought of our days in the prison, of the unexpected bond with Cassian, of Lyra's single tear. Whatever happened, we had not died alone in the dark. We had found the light. But as the silence stretched on, I slowly opened my eyes. A strange commotion was rippling through the crowd, not cheers or jeers. A hushed, spreading silence, a wave of focused attention. People were not looking at us, they were looking at each other. They were passing something from hand to hand. Small scraps of parchment. The camera of our story, if there were one, would pan wide. It would show these scraps moving from person to person, from the slaves in the highest tiers to the wealthy merchants below. On them were not calls to rebellion. They were the verses of Zeno, the symbols of the Lumina, tiny drawings of hope and dignity. It was Lyra. We never knew how. Perhaps she persuaded a sympathetic guard. Perhaps she used Valerius's own funds. But in the preceding days, she, the one meant to be the instrument of Lumina's destruction, had become its most powerful agent. She had turned our final testimony into thousands of tiny, uncontrollable echoes, spreading through the very heart of the empire. Valerius shot to his feet, his face contorting from smug satisfaction to rage, then to bewildered panic. He could kill 2 men, but how could he confiscate thousands of pieces of parchment? How could he silence an idea once it had been planted in thousands of minds? The executioner stood frozen, confused, awaiting an order that never came. No one was paying attention to him anymore. The execution had become a sideshow. The main event was now taking place in the hearts and minds of the crowd. I looked at Cassian and he looked at me. For the first time we smiled at each other, a smile of acceptance and victory. I looked up at Lyra. She was looking at me too, and this time her eyes were not empty. They were filled with light. The light of the Lumina, of love, of sacrifice. She had found her way back. I don't know what happened next. Perhaps the axe fell, perhaps it didn't. It no longer mattered. Because this story doesn't end with our deaths. It ends with the birth of something much bigger, a movement that no longer needed leaders, an idea that had been set free. I began this journey to save my sister. In the end, the ideal we fought for saved all of our souls. They can take a life, but they cannot extinguish a light, because the light is not in a temple or a book. It is in you, and it is waiting to be shared. That was my story, my confession, a journey from the darkness of revenge to the light of sacrifice. And if this story of the light of Kalin, Cassian, and Lyra has touched something inside of you, if it has lit even the smallest spark, then our mission is not over. Join our community. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because there are so many more stories waiting to be told, so many more echoes that need to be heard. Thank you for listening. And remember, keep your own light burning.